Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar where we zoom specifically in on the issue of Erasmus and the end of the transition period. My name is Anna Janssen. I'm Head of European Engagement at Universities UK International, and I'm joined today by Nikita Lewis. She's a Senior Consultant Erasmus Plus at the UK National Agency for Erasmus Plus. She's very kindly to agree to join us for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar for any questions you may have. I know we've actually put aside a full hour for this webinar, but I don't think we'll need it. My presentation will be about a little bit more than 20 minutes. And after that, we'll do the Q&A with Nikita. And depending on how many questions we'll have, we'll see how long that takes. But it's safe to say that we won't need an hour. So I'll be giving you some time back of your day. And I think most people won't mind that. If there are a lot of questions, we'll go on. If they're not, then we'll just wrap it up. As always with these webinars, the slides and a link to the recording will be shared with you after the webinar in a couple of days. And somehow the first slide never really wants to do what I want it to do. Come on. Yes, there we go. So things we'll discuss. We'll start with the end of the transition period and what that means for the current Erasmus program. Then we'll talk different possible scenarios from the 1st of January onwards. Then we'll go into the negotiations on UK association for the next Erasmus program. We'll dive a little bit into domestic alternative and what that may look like. And I'll also give you some thoughts of what we think it should look like and what we've told the government it should look like. Then we'll go into the different things you can do to prepare for the end of the transition period. And I'll also address two other related topics, namely, what the new immigration system means for mobility, short-term mobility, and also some data protection guidance. After that, we'll do the Q&A, at which Nikita will come back and join us for that. So just to say that for the current Erasmus Plus program, UK universities remain fully eligible and can continue to participate completely in that program until the end of the running project. So that basically means any funding that you have gotten under the current Erasmus Plus program will be able to continue as normal. So mobilities, even if they start in 2021, as long as that is funding from the current Erasmus program, can just continue as normal. So that really means that UK-based staff students can participate in exchanges from funding of the current program, and students and staff from other participating Erasmus countries can come to the UK on funding that is gotten from the current Erasmus program. It's important to say that this doesn't change if we don't get a free trade agreement, and it's also unaffected by the UK's internal market bill. And this is something that the Commission has formally confirmed, that the internal market bill won't affect the UK's participation in any of the EU programs, so also not in Erasmus. So then just a little bit about the possible scenarios from the 1st of January onwards. So we are now in the last bit of the transition period, and with the UK not extending it, we really need to have all the ducks in a row by the end of the year. And I think it's safe to say that also the negotiations have been ongoing. They haven't been as progressing as we'd like them to be. We've heard and we've noticed that talks have intensified the last few weeks. And we have also heard that maybe a deal is in the cards in a few weeks. So fingers crossed, let's hope that is going to happen. And I think even though we might hear some positive signs here and there, it's still very relevant to think about what might happen at the end of the transition period if we don't have a deal. But before we do that, I wanted to just explain that you've got two different processes working side by side, influencing when the UK can associate to, and if the UK associates to, Erasmus+. So on the one hand, the process that you all know, the EU-UK Free Trade Agreement negotiations, and on the other hand is the wrapping up of Erasmus+. So the content and the budget of the new program still have to be finalized. And it's not really until that they are finalized that the discussions for negotiations for the UK to associate can start for that specific program. So these two processes together kind of determine the three different scenarios that are possible from the 1st of January onwards. So the first one is where the EU-UK negotiations for the Free Trade Agreement and the program associations for Erasmus Plus specifically are finalized on time. So that would translate itself into the UK associating to Erasmus Plus on the 1st of January 2021. Then the second one is where the EU-UK negotiations on the free trade agreement or the programme associations are delayed, but association still looks likely. So that means that association is still on the table, but the UK does have to have stopgap systems in place to bridge the gap from the 1st of January until we do associate. And then the third one is that either the free trade agreement negotiations fail or association to Erasmus Plus negotiations fail, and then the UK doesn't associate, and we would need a complete domestic alternative in place to replace Erasmus. Something I think that's really important to stress is that we find ourselves in a different no deal type of scenario than we did last year in March and in October. If we had left without a deal, then that really would have meant that we would have been kicked out of the program while we were participating in it and while the programs were still very much up and running. And this is not the case now, because under the withdrawal agreement, our participation in these programs is protected, as I already said earlier. So it basically just means that if we don't have a free trade agreement and if we don't associate later on, then we won't have access to the new program, but it won't affect our current participation in the current program, even with mobility starting after the end of the transition period. I think another important thing to highlight is that the free, and you might have already deduced this from what I was saying, but having a free trade agreement doesn't mean automatically that the UK associates to Erasmus+, because how you should see the free trade agreement is really as a framework, and that framework is what we need in order to do the further negotiations. But then the Erasmus Plus negotiations and the association would be as a separate chapter underneath that framework. So that is why you have two processes. You don't have the FTA only, but you also have the program wrapping up and the content of the budget that needs to be done in order to start the association negotiations specifically for that program. Then needless to say, I think it's our priority to associate to Erasmus+. We've always been very clear about this, and we've lobbied for this both here in the UK for the UK government, but also in Brussels and with our stakeholders across Europe. And we have done multiple public statements on this, but the latest one we did is when we did a joint statement with the Association of Colleges and the European Students' Union, NUS UK, and the Erasmus Students Network, where we basically just said, negotiators, please try and find a solution that would help and that would allow the UK to associate, because if it doesn't, you've got really a lot of missed opportunities for students, and that is something that we don't want. Overall, I would say the negotiations for EU programs are going pretty well and better than, for example, fisheries or level playing field. Our areas are not that contentious. However, there is still quite a big difference, I would say, in positions on Erasmus between what the UK wants and what the EU is offering. The EU is really offering access to the entire program for 7 years, and you'd have a GDP-based calculation, whereas the UK position, and you can read it in their published mandate for the negotiations, is they're speaking about a time-limited commitment and parts of the program. And I think it's fair to say that you could translate this into that the UK government is primarily interested in the mobility aspects of Erasmus+. They're not interested in Key Action 2 and 3. Now, I can imagine Key Action 3 because it's a lot, it's European policy, but Key Action 2 we feel would be quite a shame if we lost that. We have made the value for money case on Erasmus to the government. What we did was just said, if you look at what we get in terms of funding and look at what students spend when they're in the UK on their Erasmus period, we actually benefit financially. But it seems that the UK government is taking a more narrow value for money approach, if you like, where they're looking at how much money we're getting out of the Erasmus Plus program and then how much it would cost to pay in annually to participate. And if the position is that mobility is your main interest and you're not that interested in the other parts of the program, then it becomes quite an expensive program to participate in. So if we don't associate, then we need a domestic alternative. And I'm going to caveat everything I say right now with saying none of this has been confirmed. None of this is official policy. This is just what we've heard, what a domestic alternative could look like, or what the ambitions of the government are. But much of this will really depend on the funding that will be made available for this, and we're all waiting to see what that would be, and then we will probably hear more about what the actual program would look like. But again, in terms of ambitions, what we have heard is that it would fund staff and student mobility on all levels, including PG and PhD mobility, a global scheme covering the entire UK. It would potentially also include organisational support and special needs support. And as I said, the government hasn't committed to replacing the non-mobility aspects of Erasmus+. Again, I don't think that they're interested in those aspects. And they also haven't made a commitment, but again, they haven't committed to any of this, but it's also still very much a question mark if inbound mobility would be funded. Should a national scheme be necessary? Again, I think this is really very much dependent on the funding that would be available. I know a discussion is going on about this, but I think it's very likely that it would not be funded at all, or just be a very tiny part of the entire alternative. So I think that is something really for European partners, if that were to be the case, for them to be aware of and to see what that would mean for their own mobilities. So what have we asked for in terms of a domestic alternative? Because you can imagine we've been, and my colleagues really have been very closely involved and talking to the government about this domestic alternative. And basically what we've been saying is, you really need adequate funding to support the growth we've been seeing in outward student mobility. Make sure that there isn't a gap in funding, provide opportunities for both staff and student mobility, continue the institutional top-up allocations and the maintenance loans, and make the system easy so that we continue our exchanges with European partners, incentivize inbound mobility, be flexible on mobility options, type and destination countries, and reflect the context of all UK nations. And of course, this one I think is quite popular, avoid heavy levels of administration and reporting. Then a little bit of guidance, in terms of how do you prepare for the end of the transition period, and what can you do? So again, to repeat, and I've said this a couple of times, if we don't have a free trade agreement, then still all of our current commitments under the current Erasmus Plus program are protected, and you don't need to worry about those. They can continue as planned. And then looking at what can you do in terms of the wrap up of this program and continuing mobility within this program. So I would really say that as an institution, you have to think about how you want to manage your funding and how you want to stretch your funding, if you do want to stretch your funding. So if under the 2020 core you had a 24-month grant agreement, you can extend that to 36 months. Try to make sure that you have that signed up by the end of the year. And you could decide in Key Action 103, for example, to either give everyone a little bit less money so that more students can go and everyone gets a little bit, but everyone gets reduced level of funding, or make a policy decision about what is your prioritization in terms of funding. So that means that you could take into consideration a student's WP background, or whether or not a course is compulsory or not, and really decide how you spend your funding based on those prioritization. I think these decisions have impact on students, and you'd have to be very clear, open and transparent about these decisions and why you've made them. Other bits of information and guidance that we give our universities is take stock of the immigration requirements for UK outgoing students on study and work placements at the end, beyond the end of the year, and ensure that these students are advised of national guidance. In the slide, you'll see a hyperlink, and that links to some guidance that we published last year, and I think it's the top 10 Erasmus receiving countries of UK students and their third country immigration rules. Be mindful that changes in immigration regulations for incoming students at the end of the transition period, and inform them, and consider advising inbound EU nationals to arrive before the end of the year to simplify their visa requirements. Then a second slide with some more guidance, and I think the first one is quite well known amongst universities. Be mindful of the Competition and Markets Authority guidance, which means that universities should be careful about how they advertise periods abroad, and you can't just say Erasmus Plus period abroad without caveating that depends on the UK's association to the next programme. Ensure that students on study or work placements in the EEA for 6 weeks or more apply for a student EHIC before departure, but this applies to students who then also start their placement before the end of the transition period. And ensure that UK students abroad are covered by the institutional insurance policies in the event the EHIC card becomes invalid. Then two bits of information which are related and I think important to just flag. The interinstitutional agreements for Key Action 1 have been extended by the Commission and will be applicable for the duration of the project. And the Charter will continue to apply for projects that are funded under the current programme. Now, for the next programme, UK universities haven't been able to apply for the Charter yet, but we're hoping that when we do associate, that the Commission would allow for an extraordinary call for UK universities to apply for the Charter, and we wouldn't have to wait until the next available call. Other things to consider would be talking to your European partners and suggest that they talk to their national agencies about extending their 2020 grant agreement so that they can use that funding to send their students to the UK, and also to flag with European universities, and again something for them to take up with their national agencies, that the new Key Action 1 envelope in the new Erasmus programme will probably have a 15% budget envelope that would allow for international mobility, so you could use that to send students to the UK. So then a little bit of information about immigration and what that means for short-term placements, and there are a couple of hurdles here that we are trying to overcome. So if students are coming to the UK for less than 6 months, then they can come here on the visitor route. This is not a visa route, and they would just be able to use their e-passports to come to the UK, and that would replace the current short-term study visa. Then for work placements, there is at the moment a bit of uncertainty about how the new points-based system would allow for work placements to happen in terms of immigration rules. The government is aware of this, and we're talking to them about long-term and short-term solutions. So long-term solution, we think we would want a dedicated immigration route for mobility, not just work, but also study mobility, and that would just cover everything in one go. And the Department of Education and Home Office seem to be open to having these conversations, but we've heard that there isn't capacity at the Home Office at the moment to make sure that you've got that dedicated immigration route in place by the end of the year. So that means that we need to have something in place to bridge the gap between the 1st of January and when we actually do have that immigration route. So again, this is nothing I'm going to tell you right now is confirmed, but these are things that we are working on with government, and they are trying to work through in terms of how they would organize this. But if they could place the new Erasmus Plus program and or the domestic alternative, whichever one we would end up with, on the government authorized exchange scheme list, which would then allow students on work placements to apply through the Tier 5 temporary work route. For the Tier 5 route, the requirements would be to pay any fee and immigration health charges. An applicant would have to demonstrate biometrics, have a passport, and have a certificate of sponsorship. But again, this is not confirmed as the solution yet, but just to flag to you that these are the type of solutions that we're thinking of in terms of work placements. Then in terms of study arrangements between 6 and 12 months, at the moment, the way it's looking, it means that students would have to apply through the student route. Now, we know that is not an ideal solution because it's quite an expensive route for a student who would, for example, only come to the UK for 9 months. They would have to pay the health charge and just the fee for the visa itself, which is quite expensive for a short-term placement. This is something the government is aware of, and we are talking to them about what kind of concessions can be made in order to, just again bridge the gap until we have an immigration route that would cover also study arrangements, and that would be a much more light touch version. but we're talking about them, in the in-between period, we do need something, and if that is going to be a student route, can't there be concessions for students who are going to come here just for mobility placements? Make it less expensive, drop the language requirement and stuff like that. But again, no confirmation yet, and we're working with government on this, and hopefully have this sorted soon. Then the other relevant thing I wanted to flag is data protection, because we do get questions from both universities in Europe and our own universities, what to do with this. So the general data protection regulation doesn't apply anymore after the end of the transition period. At the moment, there isn't any announcement yet on what will happen from the 1st of January onwards. What the EU and the UK have said is that, and the UK has also said that they would seek an adequacy decision, and that is just simply the process through which the EU goes in order to determine if a third country has the right safeguarding or the proper level of safeguarding measures for data protection exchange, so that those exchanges can continue without any additional safeguarding measures to be put in place. Now, this adequacy decision hasn't been issued yet, and if that adequacy decision won't be issued by the end of the year, the kind of advice that we are giving universities is, to consider reviewing your data transfers, what is going to who, how often, and consider all your data flows. Think about cloud services based in the EU, HR and payroll services, databases, research databases, and other mobility databases. And a thing that you could do is look at inserting a clause in your existing contracts to deal with data protection and the adequacy issue. And the link I've included in the slide is of the Information Commissioner's Office. They give you much more detailed information on how you could do that. So I would highly recommend you to visit that website if you have any questions. Then this is just a slide that gives you the hyperlinks of the guidance that we have online. And especially the first one goes into Horizon Europe, Erasmus, immigration, but we recently also updated it with issues like procurement and taxes, and quite things that universities still need to think about, but of course aren't the core, at least not in our area of work, the core things that we think about. But we have asked some stakeholders to just give us some information on these issues. So I would highly recommend you to check out that document as well. And then there's some FAQs for EU students and EEA students. So thank you very much for listening. I'd like to now invite Nikita to join us for the Q&A session. And before we dive into the questions, Nikita, is there anything you want to add to what I've said, or anything else you might want to just flag?
Thank you, Anna. I just wanted to actually make a point on one thing, which is with the ability to extend your Key Action 103 and Key Action 107 projects, there isn't actually a deadline of the 31st of December to get those extensions done by, so no panic. That one can be taken off the future slides. For those who are UK beneficiaries, we currently have a survey out to you to let us know if you want to extend your 2020 grant agreements, and that deadline I think is the 20th of November to get back to us, but that's just to tell us, and then we'll process the grant agreements afterwards. The 31st of December isn't a cut-off date for us, so don't worry about it.
Brilliant, thank you, very useful. Let me just look at the chat box for the questions. All right, first question. Will there be tuition fees for Erasmus Plus students from 2021 onwards for Erasmus Plus students with projects from calls from 2019-2020? So again, for all the activities under the current Erasmus Plus program, everything stays the same and nothing will change there. From 2021 onwards, if we're part of Erasmus, that should also all stay the same. If we then are in a situation where and Nikita, feel free to say if I'm saying stupid things, if we're then in a situation where we're not in Erasmus, but there are still students coming to the UK on current funding of the current program, that is still covered by the withdrawal agreement. If we are not in Erasmus and we have a domestic alternative, and European universities aren't able to send their students with funding from the current program, then that would be solved by, I would imagine, bilateral agreements. And because I think, and Nikita again help me out here, but universities between themselves decide to waive fees, right? This is not something that is directly linked to what I'm now saying, and I'm going to shut up right now.
So, okay, to be clear, anyone traveling on Erasmus Plus funding, so that's, as the example is you know, you had a student who's coming in 2021 using the 2019 grant agreement, or anyone traveling under current program funding, there's a requirement under the Erasmus Charter that they cannot be charged tuition fees by their host institution. So that is a blanket. They will not have tuition fees by their host institution. It's just not an allowed feature of the program, and that doesn't change after January, or after the end of December. And it's the same rule for those who come in from KA 107 from outside of Europe. They also can't be charged tuition fees, even if they come from Kenya or America or China. That it's just a premise of the program. And then outside of the program, I'm sure Anna-Marie, as kind of has said herself, you know, that's down for you to agree with your partners, but within the program, that's the situation.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Nikita. Another question on Erasmus Plus Key Action 103: will there be a new format for agreements which will replace the interinstitutional agreement format? If yes, will this format be UK-wide, or will universities use their own formats? So this hasn't been decided yet. I know the Department for Education is in the process of talking to stakeholders in our, you know, in universities and in our sector to see what the views are on this specific issue as well, and then decide what they're going to do on it. I think, you know, questions have been floating around. Will it be mandatory? Will it be UK-wide? Again, we don't have any confirmation on this, but we know that DFE is looking into this. And, you know, as soon as more details about the domestic alternative will be published, I'm sure this will be part of it.
And to be clear, for the Erasmus Plus program, if you are, again, mobile under current program funding, the current grant agreement templates are still valid, even if those mobilities take place in 2021, 2022, if it's using a current program grant funding. Those current IAAs are the right template. You don't need to worry about a new template. If you're looking at the future Erasmus Plus program, and if we are a participant of it, then again, like in the past, the European Commission will set the template, and in the future it will be digital, although that's not going to be the case for the mandatory for the first year.
Brilliant, thank you, Nikita. Then the next question is, will a domestic alternative include funding for widening participation? So again, nothing has been decided on and nothing has been confirmed, but what we have heard is that if we have a domestic alternative, it would include special needs support, but they are yet to elaborate on what that special needs support would effectively entail. So that's pretty much all I can tell you on that, but just to say that, yeah, they're in the process of working through, you know, what the principles are and how they want the program to work. So I can't deny and confirm, or just say that this is one of the things that they are taking into consideration. Let's see, next question. You mentioned a possibility in creating a domestic alternative. Are there perhaps talks already with Switzerland who are actually doing the same thing? So I don't know if the government is talking to Switzerland, but we have talked with our Swiss colleagues about this, and actually very interestingly, they did a presentation at the EIEE, if that's the right acronym, sorry, and where they shared a poster which evaluated the 6 years of their own national replacement scheme. And it took them 2 years to get back at the mobility levels that they had pre their domestic scheme, and they did fund inbound mobility. Of course, Switzerland's a completely different situation than the UK, but that was, I thought, quite interesting to see. I know from the Swiss that they are interested in getting back on Erasmus. But that for them, it's also part of the process of the negotiations. As an associated country, they have to renegotiate every time with every new program. So they're waiting on Erasmus Plus to be finalized as well, so that they can start their negotiations. Let's see if we've got any other questions. I maybe skipped a few that might have been, no, I covered those. Yeah, all right. Go back down. Is there any suggestion the UK government could agree to fully associate to Erasmus rather than pursuing partial association only? I think I think it's likely that if we have association, it will probably be full association. This is just based on my opinion and what I've heard and how these negotiations have been ongoing. I personally think the EU will probably not agree to partial association because that is not how the Erasmus program works, contrary to Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe, which just works differently, and there are different pillars that, and even if you're a third country, you can still participate in certain bits. Erasmus just doesn't work that way. And I would imagine that the risk the EU is running if they would allow the UK to only associate to parts of it is that then other countries are saying, yeah, well, hold on a minute. I'm not interested in the whole program either. So it's more of it's a trickier question for the EU to do this. So my hope is really for EU programs in general is that when fisheries and level playing field are being sorted out and we're in hopefully the positive vibe of negotiating and wrapping everything up, that this is just all sucked into that positive development. But I would say that what they're trying to negotiate is whether or not it's going to be full association. I'd be very interested to see if the EU was going to allow partial association, but I don't think that's very likely. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, another one. Are there any plans to extend the immigration requirements for UK students beyond the 10 most popular destinations? So yes, we've been getting these questions a lot. We are discussing it internally. This was research that we commissioned last year, part of a government funding bit that we received. And as you can imagine now with COVID, we're just trying to evaluate the funding that will be needed for this and if we can do it, but also just trying to determine if there are not other organizations that are also doing this as well. For example, DIT, I think, would be ideally placed. So we are trying to figure out if we cannot piggyback on other organizations to do this as well. But just to let you know, we are working on this and we are thinking about this, and I can't guarantee anything yet. I mean, I would imagine that in the previous year, not a whole lot will have changed in terms of third country immigration rules. So I'm thinking probably most of that will still be up to date. And it's also just really nice to have it in terms of signposting and flagging and for people to know where they can go. So, but we will, if we update it, we will let you know and it will be available. So the next one, can we extend Key Action 103 to 36 months if original application was for 16 months, but later extended to 24 months? Nikita, I am passing that one on to you.
So projects under the COVID-19 extension rules can be extended for a maximum of 12 months. But I'm not sure if you've previously extended your project before all of this happened to a 24-month contract, if you could then have the full 12 months to extend, or kind of what happens there. I think it might be possible, but what I would suggest is you write to our help desk to ask, because I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, as I've just not been asked that question before, so I don't have that specific answer. Our help desk, hopefully you've already got the email address, but I'm sure we can circulate that around if not.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have all the questions and we can follow up on that because we've got the contact information linked to the questions. So
But just to confirm, because I've seen there's another question in relation to that, if you have got a 24-month project, you can, and it was a normal 24-month project, you can extend it by a maximum of 12 months to a 36-month project. And that is the case for any active KEA 103 or Key Action 103 or Key Action 107, so any active decentralised mobility project. And you would just need to speak to us at the national agency, and for those where that from a 2020 grant, so the ones you've just got, that's what the survey I mentioned earlier is out there for, and that's on our ETT, and those of you who have got access to that will know what that is, list. Do check it out, it's on the latest HEE News newsletter with the link, and just make sure you fill in that to let us know. Some partners, there's another question. So the second part of the question is slightly different. I don't know if you want to read that one out, Anna-Mai, or I can read it.
So the second, do you mean the second part of the
accepting
some
incoming
partners in Europe?
Yeah.
You mean, yeah, okay. So the second part is some partners in Europe already have extended their programs to 36 months. Is there going to be a possibility of accepting incoming students, although we will not be able to send any?
So you can always accept incoming students. That's completely within your power, because the grants that we have for Key Action 103 for Europe are single direction only. So that just comes down to your agreements with the partner, and you don't because if it's related to a grant that is awarded under this current program, that's an eligible activity under this current program. So it doesn't matter if you have a grant still, you're still in the UK, and that's still an eligible activity under the current program, which is where that grant sits. I hope that makes sense.
So then the next question was, can you say a bit more about the UK universities and the call for Erasmus Charter? Do you want to take that one as well, Nikita?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. So your current Erasmus Charter, if you are a UK higher education provider and hold an Erasmus Charter, is valid until the end of the program. And by that we mean, you know, that last year, that last date of your grant agreements, whatever action that is. So it could even be for Erasmus Mundus, that's another 5 years that it's still valid for. You know, it's whichever kind of your final grant agreement is. But if you're looking at Erasmus charters for participating in the future program, that was touched on in the presentation, we weren't able to have UK applications as part of the process because we haven't determined whether we're in the future program yet. So that will come down to the negotiations that are going on, and then if there is access to the program, then we'll revisit the charter question then for the future program. But your current charters are still valid for the current grant agreements, even if those go beyond 2020.
Brilliant, thanks. Then the next question, for the new visitor immigration route for less than 6 month students, has any guidance been provided about whether students will need to get a visitor stamp in their passport when arriving at UK airports? We've had some problems in relation to this with the short-term visit study route where US students were going directly to e-gates and did not get the stamp, which meant we weren't permitted to enroll them. Well, I'll double check with my immigration expert, but I remember a conversation about this, and because it's going to be easier than the short-term study route, and these students, EEA and Swiss students, should be able to just use their e-passports to enter. So, but I will double check. I will follow up with my immigration lead, and I will get back to you on this question offline. Let's see if we've got any other questions coming in. Sorry, the chat always has, I think, a little bit of a delay. I don't see anything. Let me just give it a few more seconds in case it does. Oh wait, yeah, here we go. If we are renewing our agreements automatically up to the end of the program, if we extend to 36 months, are there any implications for GDPR for those extra months where there may not be an agreement between the UK and the EU? So okay, so GDPR consequences for any projects that are extended. So yes, this is something, and Nikita, you might know more, but the way I understand it, that on the GDP front of these projects, you'd need to have a data adequacy by the end of the year, or a clause in your contracts with your partners to cover the data protection. So that way you would cover the free exchange of data between your partners. Is there anything else you have to add on that, Nikita, that you might know? Yeah, I think those are the two rules. I think data protection is really separate from the programs, but they do influence both Horizon, Europe in the future, or Horizon 2020 now, and Erasmus now, and Erasmus in the future. So this is something I would say, in order to be safe, you would want to get that covered by including a contractual clause in your existing contracts. But again, I would advise you to look at the Information Commissioner's Office website, and it's a lot more detailed, and they will be able to help you on this issue. Have a look for other questions. Oh, yeah. If we are renewing our agreements, oh no, I already covered that one. Yeah. Is it agreed that we will be able to extend Key Action 103 2020 projects to 36 months if we've completed the survey to state that we would like to?
As far as I'm aware, yes. I think we're just collating what you want to do, and then we'll be in touch with you, but we won't be in touch with you until that survey has completed, and then we'll be just dealing with it all at once. So just wait until after the 20th of November and we'll be in touch with you to arrange that.
Brilliant, thank you. Will the visitor route be charged? I think it will, but it won't be as expensive as the student route, for example. I don't have the numbers, but again, I can check for you, and I can follow up afterwards and let you know. Next question, is there any chance to extend the 2018 Key Action 107 before 36 months? Nikita.
You can't extend any Key Action 103 or 107 projects for to be longer than a total of 36 months. 36 months is the limit that the European Commission has set as the maximum duration for the contracts, even if they are extended.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Let's see if we've got anything else coming in. Okay, one more and then we're wrapping up. Many partners are currently saying that they have not been told they can extend. This is impacting possible 21-22 mobility. Yeah, that's more a statement than a question, but I would advise your European partners to talk to their own national agencies about this, because they should know all the information that is applicable to them. Okay, I think that is it. I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, but like I said, there's a bit of a delay, and don't worry if your question wasn't answered. We got them on a system and they all come in, and I have your email addresses, so we will be getting back to you offline. I do this every time with every webinar, so don't worry, you will get a reply. And just to say, yeah, a big thank you to everyone for dialing in. I hope this was useful for you. Like I said, slides and a recording will be distributed within a couple of days. We will come back to you with answers to your questions also within a couple of days. And a big thank you to Nikita for joining us, because she, God knows the details that I don't know. So thank you very much for doing this. It's very much appreciated. And I think the viewers also very much appreciate you being able to give that detailed nitty-gritty level of answers. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And any questions, as I said, to you guys, but also feel free to get directly into contact with us at the National Agency about any of your grant agreement questions, and obviously we'll do our best to get back to you.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Nikita. And thank you everyone for watching, and thanks for the support behind the scenes. Everyone knows who they are. And yes, as soon as we know more when it comes to either domestic alternatives or the deal and what's this going to look like, we'll come back to you. We'll set up new webinars and give you all the details. So thanks so much, and see you next time.